Hi everyone, this is Elena Kraus and welcome to another card video. In this video, I'm using the new Concord and 9th Grateful Leaves Turnabout and of course my MISTI along with few embossing powders. So I'll be stamping only with Versamark ink and then embossing. So here's the quick look of the stamp. I already have that cross drawn with a permanent marker. So if you turn on the back of the packaging, you will see that guide where for the placement of the lines. So you can position it onto your MISTI and on the little template. So I have that template already, it's done. I'm reusing it from one project to another. I'll just slide it into my MISTI, secure it with my magnet, and then I will position my stamp. I'll make sure that the lines on the templates on my template match the lines that are onto the stamp. So I'm trying to position that nicely, and this is a good one, even if you don't center it perfectly, because the leaves are overlapping, it will look still great. So I'm picking up with the lid of my MISTI, and then I'm removing my template because I'll be using 6x6 piece of Kraft cardstock. And this is Hero Arts Kraft layering paper. It's a little bit darker than the regular Kraft paper that you see, and it's a little bit more textured. So it's really, I really like the look and the feel of this paper. So I went over with the anti-static powder tool onto my cardstock, and then I stamped once with my Versamark ink. Next, I'm going with Hero Arts brass embossing powder. Apply that onto my paper. Here you can see it much because it's pretty much the same color as my cardstock. But once it's embossed, you will see how it gets shiny. So I'm just putting everything away so I don't emboss heat set on top of my MISTI or the rest of the embossing powder. Here you can see how that embossing powder is melting and gets really nice and shiny look on that Kraft cardstock. So I think we're pretty much done here. Next, I'll put back the paper, my cardstock, into the MISTI. I'm just making sure that it's, I'm not repeating over on top of the stamped images, but I'm rotating it. Just making sure here it doesn't stamp again over the magnet, so I'm moving the magnet a little bit. Here I kind of doubted that I might have mistakenly misplaced my stamp, so just checked it with my template, and I'm again stamping with Versamark ink. Kind of making sure that I have good coverage, so I'm kind of pressing gently onto the lid. And the next color of embossing powder will be copper. This is again Hero Arts copper embossing powder, and here you can see it more. It's more visible because it's darker, and it's very pretty when it's heat set, especially on the Kraft cardstock. So I'll put that embossing powder away, making sure it's closed so I don't end up spilling it. And then again, I'm going with my heat tool to melt or heat set that embossing powder. I'm using Hero Arts heat tool here. And before I go into my paper, I kind of let it run for a couple seconds on the side and then heat set my embossing powder. So I'm kind of trying to cool it off a little bit here. And I'm placing it again back into my MISTI. So using 6x6 piece of paper, it's very useful when you're using embossing powder. So if it's adhered to that template with the heat, the not the permanent, but the temporary adhesive may just come off. So if you use 6x6, it's very easy. You don't need a template to turn around your cardstock. You can just turn it around and then cut it to size when you're done. So next I'm using gold embossing powder. I already stamped it the third time. So I'm applying it on top of the stamped images. And then I'll repeat the heat setting again. So I'm quickly melting that embossing powder there. Kind of trying to cool it off again and putting it for one and last time into my MISTI to stamp the fourth time. You can do any number of turns you want, up to 4. So you can use any colors you want. You can once or twice, 3 or 4 times. I'm doing it 4 times and embossing it with 4 different embossing powders. So for the last layer, I'll be using rose gold embossing powder. And I decided to go one more time on the top because I could not really see if it was stamped nicely or not, because I wanted to have a very nice coverage with embossing powder. So I'm using, this is Gina K Rose Gold embossing powder. And since I only have one jar, it's not in a plastic container, so I'm using coffee filter. So it helps with the static, and as well it helps putting it back into the jar. I'm just applying, making sure that I have nice coverage and shaking off the excess. I think that looks good. And I'm going back with the heat tool and melting that embossing powder. So we're done here. So you can see how colorful and shiny is that, and how nice the embossing powder looks on the Kraft cardstock. Next, I'm just trimming it down, and here I kind of miscalculated. Instead of 4 and 3 3/4, I cut it down to 5. So I'm cutting a square, and then I'll cut it, cut one side to 3 and 3/4. So, and then the leftovers, if I didn't cut that at 5, I would have a little bit larger leftover, but you can always reuse them. So next I'll stamp a sentiment. I'm just, here are the coordinating dies. It's the leaf, and it has the kind of the skeleton of the leaf, but I'm just using the outline. And I'm using the sentiment, your kindness means so much, I think. That's what it says. And again, I'm using the same Kraft cardstock. I'm stamping with Versamark, and I'll emboss with the rose gold embossing powder. Then heat set that. And I'll use the outline of that leaf die. We'll just secure it there, and by magic of YouTube, we already have that cut out. Here I have a Kraft note card that from Heroes, but I realized that it's a little bit lighter than their cardstock, so at the end I decided to create my own note card using the cardstock, and I did top folding. You will see in a second. In meantime, I'm using just some rose metallic thread to add a little bit under the leaf, and I tie a little bow on the leaf, just for a little bit of extra kind of embellishment and extra interest on the card. Even though the embossing powder adds a lot, I just like to add a little bit more here. So I'm just tying a little bow. I did the thread 2-ply because it's pretty thin, so that gives it a little bit more thickness. And next I'll be using some foam squares or hexagons to adhere that onto my layer. So here I have that Kraft panel. I'm scoring it in half, and I'll use some fun foam to adhere my panel onto my note card. So I'm using white Kraft foam, fun foam. Then on one side I adhered with the Turnabout extreme adhesive, and directly onto the card I adhered with Nuvo Tonic Deluxe liquid adhesive. So I'm just holding it down to secure it nicely, and we're finished. Here's a little close up of the card. And thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to, if you wanna see more inspiration and ideas, subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well visit my blog and subscribe there too. Thanks so much, and see you soon in another video. Bye!